Gina Carano was fired by Disney. She played Cara Dune on The Mandalorian, which is owned by Disney and part of the Star Wars franchise, very popular. But she was fired for social media posts that Disney called denigrating people based on their cultural and religious identities. And Disney called this abhorrent and unacceptable. And this was directly after Gina Carano had posted something people were universally calling anti-Semitic. I even noticed like USA Today, whenever they would talk about it, they would say an anti-Semitic post. It wasn't an alleged or according to many, or they were just also point blank certain this is anti-Semitic, which I'm going to get to exactly what that post was in a moment. Let me just note that this wasn't, Gina Carano's first time making a social media post that caused controversy. In November, she made a number of posts related to election fraud, right? Because she's conservative and she sort of bought into this idea that fraud is why Biden won. So she posted that, and whenever she did that, it caused Disney to rethink the idea of having Gina Carano star in her own spin-off series. So it cost her a job opportunity, right? And then in September, she did something on social media that caused people to call her transphobic, and I believe that was the genesis of the Fire Gina Carano movement. So also people were saying when they would say that she should be fired, they had a number of other accusations like bootlicker, QAnon conspiracy supporter, against Black Lives Matter, fascist. They would say that, I guess, because she supports Trump. But we'll get to all of those items in a moment. In fact, I may have to get to a number of those items in a second video. In this video, I'm prioritizing the charge of anti-Semitism and the charge of transphobia, because those seem to be the two most prominent things. And if not for those things, I don't believe the hashtag Fire Gina Carano would have taken off, right? So let me just, and it was actually, I based that off the fact that that's when I started seeing it, right? Going in hindsight, looking at various articles, that's when it began to appear, September specifically, because of the transphobic, what people were calling transphobic. So let me analyze what she posted that people were calling anti-Semitic on February 10th that immediately entailed her being fired. She said, Jews were beaten in the streets, not by Nazi soldiers, but by their neighbors, even by children. Because history is edited, most people today don't realize that to get to the point where Nazi soldiers could easily round up thousands of Jews, the government first made their own neighbors hate them simply for being Jews. How is that any different from hating someone for their political views? Now, I do have to point out that that last part is in quotes. I don't know if she just arbitrarily put quotes there or, but I don't know if she took that from somewhere, but in any event, it comes with an image of a woman, presumably this is a Jewish woman, being chased and beaten. So why were people calling it anti-Semitic? Well, people were in agreement that it was anti-Semitic, but there were variations as to why it was anti-Semitic. And one of the variations seemed to be, this is me trying to read between the lines what people were thinking, that neighbor meant other Jews. In other words, in that post, by the interpretation that neighbor means other Jews, she was pushing blame away from Nazis and onto Jews, which I'm going to reread it real quick. It said, Jews were beaten in the streets not by Nazi soldiers, but by their neighbors. And you can see if you interpret neighbors as other Jews, it does look like that she's pushing blame away from Nazis and onto other Jews. In other words, Jews are why, blaming Jews for being beaten, right? Because it was other Jews or something of that nature. It's clearly not even what it says. Jews and Germans lived among one another. By the context, clearly talking about talking about Germans. So that's one interpretation as to how it was anti-Semitic. I think the more prevailing interpretation was that it was trivializing of persecution that happened to the Jews by comparing her own persecution as someone that was conservative online, which people she had amassed this sort of grand disdain, sufficient enough for Fire Gina Carano to exist, right, and to gain such momentum. She was pointing at that and comparing it to persecution of Jews that Jews had to suffer. Now, you can argue that by making such a silly comparison, because they're not the same, obviously, that she was either trivializing what happened to the Jews, or she was dramatizing what's happening to her. Or you could say both, that she's doing both. But to say it's anti-Semitic, that's not the definition of anti-Semitism. In fact, this reads like something an anti-Semite wouldn't even say, because it's expressing concern and sort of an implied horror about the Jews having suffered persecution. She's implying that it was bad that they were rounded up. Therefore, I find it odd to call this anti-Semitic. An anti-Semite wouldn't they be a little more happy that happened, or happy that persecution was happening in some form? Yeah, it didn't make any sense to me. So, just to be clear, anti-Semitism is prejudice or disdain of Jews, hatred or racism towards Jews for being Jewish. That's not what she was expressing. And in fact, if you were going to say that bad analogies, that in being so grossly bad, that they trivialize what happened to the Jews, if you were to say that is a type of anti-Semitism that warrants being fired, then unfortunately Pedro Pascal, who is the star of The Mandalorian, has done the same thing. He compared the concentration camps of 1944 to the illegal immigrants and their families being placed in cages in 2018, which I must also note, children were being separated from their parents in 2018. So, okay. Obviously, not the same, right? It's not the same. 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust, and that there was no systematic murder that took place in 2018 that could be even comparable to what happened to the Jews. Now, I'm totally for trying to compare types of persecution, compare and contrast, I should say. But obviously, both examples are poor in terms of trying to compare them to what happened to the Jews. You can argue that Gina Carano's is worse, because she's talking about online harassment. And then Pedro is talking about immigrant families being put in cages. So, I feel like both it's really hard to even try to say one is fireable and one isn't. And I really think it comes down to politics. Because in Pedro's example, he's criticizing Trump. And in Gina Carano's example, she's the conservative being persecuted. Pedro's example, the conservatives doing the persecuting. Gina's is the conservative being persecuted. And you have to understand that in Hollywood, folks tend to lean left. Gina Carano is on a well-known show. It's very popular. And she's also a conservative in Hollywood. And she's a conservative that doesn't hide it. So she drew the ire of many, which I'm going to get to the other claims that were made against her in a moment. So that's the first claim of anti-Semitism. There's also another thing that was less widely shared, I noticed, within the hashtag Fire Gina Carano movement. And it's this. She shared this post, and it states, "All we have to do is stand up, and their little game is over." And I want you to look at it real hard. Tell me, can you spot the anti-Semitism? Because I certainly can't. But apparently, it's based off the artwork of Der Stürmer, which is a tabloid from the Nazi era. This tabloid existed in the 1920s, continued to exist under the Nazi regime. Very racist tabloid. And it had artwork similar to this. And you can see in the original artwork, which this was a mural, done with sort of the artwork from Der Stürmer. The noses are more pronounced, right? And that's supposed to indicate that these individuals are Jews. And actually, in both pictures, they're sitting around a Monopoly board. I didn't know Monopoly was that old. Which apparently, yeah, it is. So what did Gina Carano have to say? Because someone spoke to her about this. Barry Weiss from the New York Times interviewed her about that image, and Barry Weiss asked her about Gina's intent in sharing the image, and she asked her about whether she knew that the image drew from anti-Semitic imagery. To which Gina replied, "I was in utter shock and confusion when certain people said it was anti-Semitic. Then as I went to take it down, I noticed that the image was not the same as the one people were referencing. I was honestly confused. Should I take it down or leave it up? I still don't know the answer to that question because taking it down only makes the mob attack you more." She continues, "The image for me was a statement that people need to stand together and rise up. Stop being so manipulated by the powers that believe they know what's best for you and play games with our lives. My heart has only ever had ultimate respect and love for the Jewish community." Now, okay, maybe Gina's BSing us. I hardly doubt it, because that's probably your interpretation of looking at the image, right? It was my interpretation of looking at the image. This is an image comparing rich people they're playing Monopoly, right? And that's a game, where it's about, you're essentially, a greedy guy and you're trying to own everything, and that's how you win. Good analogy for big business. And that's all it looked to be criticizing, was how the rich and powerful are treating all of us like we're part of a game. That's both claims, both the original February 10th thing that she shared on Twitter, and also that image. Both claims of saying that she was trying to be anti-Semitic is extraordinarily weak. And what makes me sad is that there was nobody questioning the validity of whether it was anti-Semitic within this tidal wave of people calling her anti-Semitic, among other things. Let me talk about also the other charge, which is that she had done something transphobic, which I'm going to go step by step as to how everything transpired. Because what she did was she put the words beep, bop, boop next to her name. And let me just start at the top. What happened was there were some online trans activists, at least as early as March, that were wanting Pedro Pascal to put pronouns next to his name. And he put he/him. Eventually, in August, he did. They began asking early as March, and then he does so in August. And the idea is that having these pronouns sort of makes people, it normalizes the idea of putting pronouns next to your name. It normalizes the fact that people have different genders that are different from their biological sex, right? So it normalizes this, right? Therefore, it is supposed to diminish bullying because it makes being trans more acceptable. And given that Pedro Pascal has such a platform as the main character on a popular show, then it would be a great win to have him do this, which he did. He did it in August. And then they asked Gina Carano to do it because she's also on that very popular show. And she didn't. She didn't want to, So she doesn't want to. And here's an exchange she has in September. She says, "Yes, Pedro," referring to her co-star, "Pedro and I spoke, and he helped me understand why people were putting them in their bios. I didn't know before, but I do now. I won't be putting them in my bio, but good for all you who choose to. I stand against bullying, especially the most vulnerable, and freedom to choose." See, she's grammatically sort of messed up at the end, but she's especially the most vulnerable, and she also supports the freedom to choose. Now, the trans activist communicating with her says, "Us to Pedro for weeks. Put your pronouns in bio. It's important for the trans community. Pedro does it and understands. Us to Gina. Put your pronouns in bio. It's important for the trans community. Gina, stop bullying me. It's my right to be selfish." Okay, so trans activists online, which I'm calling them activists because this is an activist thing to do, to try to get someone to do something for gain for your cause, right? Even if they don't self-identify as an activist, that's what activists do. So Gina's saying, okay, I don't want to do it, and they're saying, please do it, and that's the conflict. So then she puts, people keep pushing, and she puts beep bop boop next to her name. Sort of a dismissive, sort of, all right, you want pronouns here, boop, boop, boop. Just sort of a something. It could have just as easily said something, something, something. You know, it's her way of being dismissive towards them, towards the people pushing her to put pronouns. But people interpreted that as her being slighting or patronizing or mocking the concept of pronouns, which is an easy interpretation to make. On first glance, that looks to be the case. But she's trying to sort of give the middle finger to people she feels are bullying her. But it looks to be like she's mocking pronouns, right? So she has some other exchanges that follow. She says, they're mad because I won't put pronouns in my bio to show my support for trans lives. After months of harassing me in every way, I decided to put 3 very controversial words in my bio. Beep, bop, boop. I'm not against trans lives at all. They need to find less abusive representation. She goes on to say in a different post, I don't think trans people would like all of you trying to force a woman to put something in her bio through harassment and name-calling every day for months, such as racist, transphobe, bitch, weirdo, I hope you die, I hope you lose your career, you're fat, you're ugly. Okay, so she also goes on to say, these posts happen very near to one another. She makes another post, and she says, Beep Bop Boop has 0 to do with mocking trans people and 100 to do with exposing the bullying mentality of the mob that has taken over the voices of many genuine causes. I want people to know you can take hate with a smile, so boop you for misunderstanding. All love, no hate. Let me just say that, first of all, yeah, she should have taken the Beep Boop Bop down because people were flipping out over it. She already expressed in that earlier quote when talking about the mural or the image that was based off the Anti-Semitic mural that she has this mentality of not wanting to let the mob win. So if people are in this rush saying, you need to do this, you need to do this, she doesn't like bowing down to what she feels is something silly to bow down to. In this case, it's the beep bop boop. She explains this is what it means. It has nothing to do with you guys. It has nothing to do with pronouns. It has to do with people bullying me to put pronouns up. Now, tragic mistake because people were interpreting it as a slight to the concept of pronouns, right? So let me just say a few other things that happened amid this saga was Pedro Pascal's sister came out of announced that she was going to transition from male to female, or at least the earliest reporting comes from February 9th, which happens to be one day before she was fired, before she made the anti-Semitic, before Gina Carano put that post up that people were calling anti-Semitic. So I do believe that the sister of Pedro Pascal coming out and saying I'm going to be transitioning, that fed the flames of the Fire Gina Carano movement, and then the alleged anti-Semitic post fed the fires even more. So, but people seemed to be confused or associating the sister transitioning with Gina knowing about it, or Gina deliberately mocking it, or that the beep boop bop was in some way related to that, or that it was insult to injury because the sister was transitioning. I'm not sure what Gina knew about the sister transitioning, but it was announced to everyone on February 9th. So, okay. People were saying she's anti-Semitic, she's transphobic, and there was many, many, many other charges, right? And they all had to do with, most of them had to do with things associated with being right-wing. I'm going to have to get to that in a separate video. As far as the anti-Semitic and transphobe claims, I have to say, the anti-Semitism one falls apart in the slightest of scrutiny. People could have said, you're trivializing the Holocaust. You should be fired, which I wouldn't agree with that either. I wouldn't agree with Pedro being fired for trivializing it with his poor comparison. I should say, trivializing it if you were to examine life through this prism, right? Where an inappropriate analogy is therefore trivializing the Holocaust. The fact that amid this torrent of people saying she's an anti-Semite, transphobe, adjective, QAnon supporter, anti-mask, anti-vax, which I'm going to get to other claims in the next video, but the fact that nobody was saying, okay, well, some of this is true, but the others are not. She's anti-Semitic, but not transphobe. She's transphobe, but not anti-Semitic. People were just taking it all in. Take it all. Just don't question any piece of this whole thing being proposed. That's indicative that perhaps, maybe, a herd mentality is taking place, right? When you have very, very, very little dissent happening in any form, that any of this is a little bit false, then that's a herd. That looks to be a herd. Now, maybe you're right on every single thing. Maybe you happen to be right on every charge. Everybody's, but I want you guys to understand, be skeptical anytime this happens, even if it's against someone you hate. Oh, and this is what makes the whole situation worse, is that Trump Jr., Ted Cruz, Dave Rubin, Ben Shapiro, assholes, major assholes, were all defending her. So when they defend her, what does the left wing see? They see the bad guys are defending her. So therefore, that only shows how that just cements the idea that we're right. And I even saw posts to that effect. One person said, I don't want to be on the same side as Ted Cruz. That is a bad way of approaching logic. To say since they support that, therefore, if Cruz is on that side, it's wrong, right? I mean, you can say he has a history of being wrong. Therefore, I'm highly skeptical of that position. But then you want to analyze the position. Then you want to look at it. You don't want to just dismiss it and say it's wrong because Cruz put his hand on it. That's like the reverse Midas touch, right? Anything Cruz touches is therefore false. That's not a way to handle life. That's not a way to handle big decisions, because life is complicated and politics is complicated and social movements are complicated, and deciding who should be fired and who should not be fired within this social media movement is also complicated. And please realize that it's called hopping on a bandwagon. When you see the current, the people that are sensitive to the rights of transgenders and the rights of and to Jews as well, or any minority, you're seeing the group that is sensitive to those concerns going in this way, and you say, well, I'm sensitive to minorities and to marginalized groups as well. Therefore, I'm going to jump on this bandwagon and say, we're right about this thing, right? Sometimes, if you want to call us the good guys can be wrong, right? So, just realize that. Sometimes we mean well to help marginalized groups, but we can be wrong about things. And that's very important if we want to grow in a logical direction as a movement, to make sure the right asses are kicked. Note how positive Gina Carano was, towards transgenders. She was being encouraging. She was saying, I support reducing bullying. I support you guys doing that. If that's a transphobe, we're doing very well. I hate, it's funny because her post about anti-Semitism was actually talking about persecution of Jews as a bad thing. Her post about that was supposedly transphobic was talking about steps to lessen bullying towards transgenders as a good thing. And you would think those are like the opposite of transphobic and anti-Semitic. This is really tiring. We got to grow up. We got to be able to analyze things before we do it. And even if you want to say she was wrong for putting the thing up about that you could argue is trivializing the Jews, trivializing the persecution of Jews during the Holocaust era, or if you're to argue that the beep bop boop is in fact a transphobic action, if you want to stand by that, is it fireable? Is it so bad that it's fireable? It was, what it was meant for. Like, what it was meant for. It was meant to attack people she was perceiving as bullying. So knowing that, you still want to have her fired? Or did you just not know? Did you not, try to figure it out? We all fall victim to herd mentalities at one point or another. Just try not to do it. Try the next time you see a herd movement. This really goes for the left wing or right wing. Stop, hit your brakes, say, is my team correct? Is the bad guys, if you want to call it that, the other team? And maybe they're right about a few things.